You are looking at a very dehydrated witch. Get me a spell to block those UV rays, am I right? Except that would be sunscreen and just drinking more water. Today, I'm going to be doing the time and place tag that was created by Jen Campbell. Although your inductive logic may have already formulated this explanation for you, you were supposed to take out 10 books from your bookshelves and talk about the memories you had to the specific time and place that your reading experience took place. However, guidelines. So I have 5 books that I'm going to be talking about with you today. Although sadly, none of them are about witches. The first book I'm going to be talking about is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which I bought last summer when I was on vacation in the Okanagan in BC at one of my favorite bookstores. And this was the first and only John Steinbeck I have read thus far, and I was very intrigued by it. So even though I was in the middle of other books, I started reading it immediately when we got back to the lake and I was sitting on the beach. And that was the perfect setting to read this book in because, as you may know, John Steinbeck has incredible descriptions of fields and the sun and rivers. And so the experience came alive for me because I was sitting in the sun and I was by the water. And this book was heart-shattering to the point where as I was reading it, and I did read it all the way through because as you can see it's quite short, my face was just like the whole time, and everyone around me was like, are you okay? You okay? Need some time? So just, you know, good memories of a devastating afternoon at the beach. The second one I have already mentioned on my channel, but original content is hard. And that is Dear Canada, No Safe Harbor, The Halifax Explosion Diary of Charlotte Blackburn, Halifax, Nova Scotia, 1917. I read this when I was in Halifax because I thought that would just be a really great idea. So most of the Dear Canada series isn't this brutal. However, I was reading this in the basement of my relative's house where we were staying, and I was sharing a bed with my sister who was sleeping beside me, and I got to the part that we all knew was coming, which is the Halifax explosion, and that was the first horrific graphic description of destruction I've ever encountered. And there is this grotesque part where the main character in this book had been having a fight with her older sister and they didn't get along that well, and she was out of the house when the explosion happened, and she came back to the house where her older sister and her mother were, and she saw her sister's hand poking out of the rubble and destruction. And I also, background knowledge, I have an anxiety disorder, and a lot of that as a child manifested in death anxiety. So that happened, triggered an anxiety attack when I was lying by my sister, and I was full on crying and frozen. I remember just holding my sister's hand, and it was just it was not cute. The next book is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I read this book last September, and I remember wanting to finish it before school started. And at that time, I was very stressed out because I was starting my second year of university, and my first year of university was plagued by incredible amounts of depression, which was coming to its close, but I wasn't sure that it was, and I was very worried that my second year was going to be the same as my first year, and I just knew that I couldn't take that. And I was also stressed out because school is just starting, there's no settled routine yet, lots of stuff happening, lots of space for unnecessary overthinking and anxiety. So there was one day during my first week of school where I came home from class, I did my reading on Play-Doh, which is very relevant, and I just didn't know what to do with myself, wasn't feeling that great, so I decided to read the last 350 pages of this book. I was just reading this book in my bed, And I've actually done a video on this book that I'll link below if you're interested in hearing more about it. And it just makes you feel queasy. And I think that's something that a lot of people have experienced reading this book, is the sense of uneasiness and queasiness, and it kind of makes you feel sick. And it just left me in a really bad headspace, and I had a very bad night after that. However, after that, I had a great couple of days, and the rest of that year was great. So I purged it all from my soul. And now we have Killing in War by Jeff McMahon, which is about as fun and lighthearted as it sounds. This was my most recent read, and I read this in my last spring semester for the second class that I've taken on the ethics of war. This one specifically focused on killing in war. This book is a rigorous, analytical, philosophical text, and the hardest thing I've ever read, because what Jeff McMahon is doing is completely taking up the conventional just war theory, which informs currently conventional warfare law and politics. So I just have memories of spending hours in my prof's office hours, in the library until it closed, and in empty classrooms with other people in that class, trying to unpack and understand what was happening here. The last book that I'm going to talk about today is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. So I read this book on the same trip as the Halifax Explosion one, but when I read this book I was in New Brunswick and I was staying with my Nana, who had actually introduced me to the series because she was the one who read me the first book. So I was there the day the book was released, so she bought it for me, and after that moment, glued to this book. It rarely left my hand because I was just reading through it at every possible second, either sitting in her kitchen or in our hotel room, just everywhere I could. And also, I had completely set myself up for Harry to be a tragic hero. So, spoiler alert, I was 100% prepared for and expecting Harry to die. I wasn't like looking forward to it, but that was what I knew was going to happen and had been preparing myself for throughout the reading of this novel. However, there got to be a point where I just couldn't wait any longer, and like an asshole, I read the last sentence. I knew that my prediction was incorrect, which A, I didn't like, and B, meant that I had to completely rework like what I thought was going to happen and my expectations for the end of the book. And so I actually didn't finish this book until we had flown home from New Brunswick back to BC, and I was sitting in my living room on the couch, very jet-lagged, tired, very confused that I was wrong, and I got to the part where Harry is preparing to die. So the part where he is leaving Hogwarts under the invisibility cloak, he's going down the steps, he passes Ginny, I think, and he is like becoming aware of how alive he is because he knows he's going out to meet his death in the forest. And it broke me. I was uncontrollably sobbing because that part was so sad, but also I was like, but I know he doesn't die now. It was a lot. I was broken as a human. Pieces of my soul laid in this book, Horcruxes, am I right? And like to the point where my little sister, who had no idea what was going on, came out of her room and was like, "Are you okay?" Threw Kleenex at me, went back into her room and called my mom, who was at work, and was like, "Ileana's dying." If you like watching this kind of video, I will leave Jen's, the original one, below, and you should of course watch that. And I would also recommend Claire from Reading Bukowski's because her video was just lovely. If I do this long enough, do I become a witch?